What's up, everybody? In this video, I'm going to share with you my recap of the Ironman Lake Placid 2025 race that happened this past weekend. Before I do, though, I'd like to just show you the medal this year. I love this medal. It's really cool compared to the other medals. They're all cool in their own way, but so far, this is my favorite, and that is not recency bias. I actually do like this one the best so far. It's big. It looks semi-gold, so it looks like I may have done better than I did. And it's just all around pretty cool. So happy to show that to you. I took some time before this video to just write down the events of the day, starting with the early morning and working my way through setting up for the day and then the actual race. So starting at the swim, through the bike, through the run, and then straight to the finish line. So I hope you enjoy this process. I try to be fairly detailed about the events of the day without going like too far into the weeds, but hope you enjoy. So on the morning of the race, I woke up at 3:30, and as I made my way into the kitchen, I silenced the other 20 alarms that I set for myself just to make sure that I would be up for this race. It was quiet and calm, but at the same time, I could already feel the race energy building in town. I grabbed my 2 rolls with peanut butter and honey, my classic pre-race meal, and I mixed together one of my carb drinks to help wash it down. As I sat there eating, I calculated the total calories of my morning meal and timed it against when I planned to have my pre-race gel, which was a Morton caffeinated gel, 100 calories and 100 milligrams of caffeine. The trick here is to eat enough calories that you'll have energy in the morning that can hopefully sustain you through the better part of the day, but not so much that you'll have to use the bathroom once the race starts. After eating, I spent some time stretching and foam rolling as I rubbed my warm-up oil on my shoulders and my legs, and the purpose of this warm-up oil is to minimize the amount of burning once you start getting active, and obviously to warm you up. So after that, I put my tri-suit on and then my morning sweatsuit. It was a cold morning, around 56 degrees, but I felt my body radiating heat as I left my Airbnb and loaded my car with anything that I wouldn't need for the race. On my way to the transition area, I was greeted with a very familiar feeling. I've been here before many times now, and each time it's even more calm. Despite the anticipation of the day, I was calm and relaxed. Likely because the night before I prepared my whole plan for the day. I wrote everything down to the letter. How many gels I would eat, how many of them would be caffeinated, how many bottles of sports mix, where I was going to push hard and where I was going to go easy, and all the details surrounding my whole race plan like that. I had the whole day laid out in my mind, and even before bed, I spent a lot of time in my head visualizing the step-by-steps of this race. Again, that's a perk of experience, especially on this one course. As I entered the transition tent, I had my morning bag and my personal needs bags with me. At this point in racing, my personal needs bags are pretty non-existent. All I had were a few bottles of my sports mix to swap out on the bike, and that's really it. I opted to not have a run personal needs bag. At this point in the race, or at that point in the race, there's almost nothing extra that I'll want to eat or drink, nothing extra that I'll need to push me for the last 13 miles. So I choose to do without, and knowing that I'll just press forward on the course. Taking another moment to pause, I stood still and looked around at all the frantic athletes. For many of them, this is their first Ironman, and for others this wasn't their first, but this is the first on a course like this. The Lake Placid course is known for being one of the hardest, if not the hardest, in the country. The extreme elevation gain on the bike and the hilly run sets this race apart from pretty much all other courses. I took an extra minute to speak to some of the first timers on the course, to ease their minds and give them some last minute tips before their race began. And I was surprised and not surprised, but many of them really did appreciate this. Without realizing, and before I even knew it, time was moving rapidly. 6:10, then 6:15, then 6:20, announcements began as the pros lined up and the national anthem began. Time to line up with my swim time. I was looking for Tom, my first full Ironman coaching client. Today was his first Ironman triathlon, and more than that, only 30 weeks prior he had absolutely no triathlon experience at all. I started by giving him what is now called the Zero to Ironman training program to teach him everything that he'd need to know over the course of the next 30 weeks. Then I personally coached him week after week to get him to this very moment. Standing there and looking around, I hear, "Yo, Nick," from behind. Waiting for my eyes to adjust as I turned around, I saw Tom walking towards me from the 1:30 time card, exactly where we planned for him to start. He looked ready to race, clearly a little nervous, but I assured him once more that he was ready and going to do amazing. He put in the work, he did his best to hit every training session, and he was consistent for the whole 30 weeks. There was no doubt in my mind how he would do. After a few minutes of chatting, and the group of swimmers walking towards the water started actually getting to start, Tom went back towards his starting area, and I stayed around mine, which was with the 1 hour and 20 minute swimmers. Before I knew it, it was time to go. Passing through the starting gate, I knew exactly where my fiance and my family would be standing. So I took a moment to face that way, and it was left as I was getting out of the gate. And as I was jogging towards the water, my eyes immediately locked with theirs, and I gave him a nice wave before diving in the water. The temperature was perfect, and I felt great. Normally, when hopping into the water on race day, the body has a surge of adrenaline that causes people to start off a little bit too hard. But not today, not for me. Today I felt smooth. I hit a good breathing rhythm straight away. I swam towards the drag line, which, if you don't know, is a line in the water that marks the course. Distanced myself slightly to allow others to fight for that primary position by the drag line, and I turned my brain off. At this point, I know exactly how fast I'm swimming based on effort. This is a skill that takes some time, but once you know how to settle into your race pace, this becomes very simple. Get into race pace, stay there for the next however many minutes, and that's the whole swim strategy. Throughout the swim, I had the pleasure of observing several funny things around me. The presence of mind was a nice distraction from the high effort I was putting in. For example, I noticed this one older guy who was an absolute brute, elbowing and kicking literally everyone around him. Somehow, this guy was still a fast swimmer despite his crazy form, and with perfect irony, he was right around my speed, and absolutely perfectly. I didn't mind for some reason, and I found some humor in it. Just the way that he was barreling through people, got tired from the effort of pushing forward, drifted back slightly as he was getting tired to recover, and then straight back to barreling through people. It was crazy. It was really crazy. But it gave me something to think about on the long swim. Before I knew it, I was halfway, and the pack really thinned out. The halfway point in each leg of the race is typically where you'll be separated into your groups. So now, finding my group in the second half, which unfortunately still included this older guy, we all stuck together, passing a few stragglers along the way, and completed our second lap of the swim, officially marking the end of the 2.4-mile swim. Finish time, 1 hour, 16 minutes, and 57 seconds. A time I'm very happy with and expected of myself, actually. I ran out of the water slightly discombobulated, as is typical on a swim of this intensity, ran over to the wetsuit strippers, and yes, that's what they're called, who helped me rip off my wetsuit. I then ran towards the transition tent to gear up for the bike. On my way towards the transition area, both Tom's family and my family were stationed at different viewing points of the corral, and in all honesty, I love this part of the race. Getting to see your loved ones and friends cheer you on from the sidelines really means a lot to me, and I think it means a lot to everybody, but it's one of those things that gives me a lot of energy as I press forward into the race. And the biggest bright side was the rain hadn't started yet. When I checked the weather earlier, and if you follow my stories on Instagram, you'll know that the forecast showed heavy rain for the majority of the day, and I was a little nervous about the crazy 40-mile-an-hour downhills in that pouring rain. Everyone was. So I was relieved to notice that, starting out, the rain hadn't started yet. I exited T1, which is transition 1, in 8 minutes and 38 seconds. Hopping on the bike, I started my nutrition plan as soon as I could establish T = 0, which is the start of my nutrition plan. From that moment forward, every 40 minutes I had a Morton gel, and every hour I had a bottle of fuel. I felt my stomach was already a little bit off, likely due to the gel and mix I just had before the swim start, but I knew that gel was critical for the rest of the day, and it showed in my swim performance. Now that I was on the bike, everything was a bit more simple. The goal was to hold between 145 and 155 beats per minute for the duration of the race. This is pretty high effort, but this is the equivalent of tracking my race pace throughout the ride and the run. On a hilly course, I'll just add this note: it's much better to go based on your heart rate than your speed, because you never know how your body's going to react to certain grades that you're riding up. So go straight based on effort. With all the fitness I built up over the previous few months, I needed to trust my body that I could actually race this race rather than just finish the race. The hills started immediately, burning my muscles until the burn reduced only to a slight burn that could be managed for the rest of the race. Each year I do this course, I notice that the hills are where I have my advantage over other racers. While other athletes slowly grind up the hills, I tend to grind right past them, even while keeping my effort consistent. With each hill, I passed more riders and aimed to maintain my advantage on the downhills. I kept as aero as possible while keeping my hands ready to brake, only to continue grinding it out on the next hill/mountain. The rain started shortly after getting started on the bike, but the funny thing is, I can't really pinpoint a moment where I remember it starting. My mind entered this state of extreme focus on the bike, where I was only concerned with riding and managing my effort. This happens in races, of course, but added power demands of the many regular climbs also helped me get into a highly focused state. When the rain started to get really heavy, all I remember was occasionally looking down at my arms and legs, noticing goosebumps everywhere. The wind and the rain were freezing cold, and the temperature was in the low 50s. It rained the whole ride. There were moments during the ride where I can't remember thinking a single thought. Occasionally I find myself saying, "We're having a great day," and I'm gonna do better than I could ever imagine. You see, I was raised in a Christian family, so church and God have always been a center of who I am, even if it's deeper down at some times. But the night before the race, my parents prayed for me, as they typically do before a big event, and my dad said something that resonated with me. Something along the lines of, allow Nick to have power and endurance that he doesn't even know he possesses. The idea that I could operate on a different level than I realize, this idea really stuck with me and touched me. So, when I was out on the bike and it was freezing cold, I didn't even feel it. A few times I noticed I was thinking while out there. My thoughts were centered around this powerful mindset of exposing more power and endurance than I knew I was capable of sustaining. The other thoughts I'd centered around how blessed I was to have such a support network through my family, my fiance, and my friends. Every so often, as I was riding the course through the pouring rain, I would look over to the side of the road and see one of my family members standing with signs and cowbells cheering me on. It really felt like they were there the whole time with me, and especially in that weather. It was really, really nice. I didn't really feel like I had to dig deep until around 75% of the bike. At that point, the cold and the power were starting to take their toll. My hamstrings started tightening, which was the same issue that I had towards the end of my training block. I also felt the miles wearing at my muscles. For a brief moment, I was worried that I might have pushed too hard, but I quickly pushed those thoughts out of my mind and locked in. I held my heart rate and effort exactly where I was supposed to, and despite the sore muscles and accumulating fatigue, I pushed hard to the finish of the bike course. The end of the bike course is filled with rolling continuous uphills, followed by a large high-grade climb that marks the end of the hard part of the course. I grinned through that climb, topped over, and coasted the last mile into town to finish the bike. Now, I did one thing that was smart that a lot of other people weren't doing. That last mile through town, with the wet roads and relatively flat and downhill elevation, is the perfect pre-transition to let your legs recover without losing much time. So, keeping a light pedal here allowed me to recover a little bit before the big run. I hopped off my bike through the finish, handed off my bike, and made it to T2. Finish time for the bike, 6 hours, 18 minutes, and 51 seconds. Over 7,000 feet of elevation gain. Running through transition, I grabbed my bag that was somehow not wet inside, changed my socks quickly, put my socks on, now put my shoes on, and went straight out to the run. T2 finish, 5 minutes, 32 seconds. Starting out the run, I noticed that my quads and my hamstrings were torched from the ride. I was nervous about my hamstrings with the agitation from the ride, and if what happened to me during training happened here, that would kill my marathon. As I took my first steps, I noticed that my legs would hardly bend and that my feet that had been soaking for the past 6 hours were primed and ready to blister. Still, I put those thoughts out of my mind and just started. Once again, using the beginning of the run as t=0, I took a gel and started running. Because my legs were so burnt, I had to modify/stiffen my run form, generating speed mostly from my core and from my calves. As weird as it felt at first, my starting pace was great. Feeling oddly great despite my body being super tight, I held this pace with a heart rate of 150 BPM and reminded myself of my strategy. Walk the aid stations, always drink something, and continue running after the aid station. I almost let my ego alter my strategy because I was feeling so good for those first miles. Then I remembered something that my coach told me a long time ago. The strategy is not for the beginning of the race. It's so that by the second half of the marathon, you can continue with this effort without bonking and ruining your time. In other words, it's much better to be consistent and lose those 10 seconds at the aid station than having to walk the last 2 miles. With that in mind, I followed the strategy to the letter and started chipping away miles. Each step hurt as my soaked feet started to blister, but this didn't bother me. I knew my feet were going to hurt, and I knew I wasn't going to stop no matter what. So I continued forward through the pain, sticking to the plan like a machine. Just about halfway, my chest monitor stopped working completely and wouldn't give me reliable data. No matter how many times I took it out and reset it and adjusted the position, it just wouldn't work. So instead of panicking, I made a game time decision to forget my heart rate and go completely based on effort and stick to my other plan. At this point of the day, the gels were becoming intolerable, and listening to the gags of all the other runners trying to take their gels down was slightly humorous because we were all suffering together, but it was very true and real pain at this point in the race. Every 40 minutes, I would slowly nibble on a gel that took around 12 minutes for me to get down without gagging. Slowly eating the gels was actually a very helpful strategy because it didn't bombard my stomach and cause extreme reaction. Rather, it spread the discomfort over a nice 10 to 12 minute period of time, which was tolerable for me. Around mile 14, I was seeing cyclists finishing their portion of the race. My mind was in awe. Part of me was surprised, but then another part of me realized that not that long ago, that was me. In 4 short years, I went from barely finishing the bike in time. Excuse me. In 4 short years, I went from barely finishing the bike in time for the cutoff to being at mile 14 on the run while people were still coming in on the bike. I didn't think on this for too long because I had a job to do. I was still chipping away at my miles, and although I was 12 miles from the finish, I felt like it was right around the corner. At this point, I even had the pleasure of seeing Tom a few times on the marathon. By my runner math, and I was checking it frequently, he was around 5 miles behind me on the running course, and the reason why I was seeing him was because a lot of the sections of this run are out and backs along the same road. So he was around 5 miles behind me, and he was moving at approximately the same pace. I was filled with pride for both myself and for Tom. He was doing great, and he looked strong, like really strong. Each time we saw each other, we exchanged a really big high five with a big smile, and it was great to see. It was also great knowing that my coaching paid off for him. He felt great throughout the training prep. He was able to balance all of his family and life responsibilities, and here he was in his first Ironman showing an absolutely stellar performance. Not realizing how long I'd been running at this point, I saw mile marker 25, right around the corner from a massive PR. I allowed myself to continue at this pace without getting overly excited and speeding up as I ran into town and saw cheering people. One of the nicer feelings of the race this year was that Ironman printed your names on your bibs, which I have right here to show you. So as you were running into town, strangers on all sides would cheer your name and egg you on as you approached your finish. So I turned the final corner to enter the final strip where I saw my mom filming and cheering. I had a huge smile on my face as I entered the finish runway. In this final stretch, I heard my name from multiple directions. Tom's family, my family. And then at the end, on the left side of the finish line, my fiance, Melita, standing there and cheering on as I heard once more, "Nick Lawrence, you are an Ironman." I stepped through that finish line and received my medal. Finish time, 12 hours, 29 minutes, and 25 seconds at 7:14 p.m. A PR by right around and over an hour and 20 minutes from last year's performance. I then hung around in the finish area for another 50 minutes or so and had the great pleasure of seeing Tom come in at the finish line and get his first Ironman medal and hear his name over the announcement. Thomas Altini, you are an Ironman. And that's it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this race recap. And thank you for being part of this training season. If there are many of you who are watching and have been watching for a long time, it's been right around 8 months now of since I started this series in the training prep. So thank you for those of you who've been watching since the beginning. And it'll take a little bit of time to recover from this race, probably 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Start training next week. And then we'll sit down and see what we have next on the radar. But for now, thank you for watching. And if you enjoyed this, please subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.